Call the meeting to order. Meeting of the Tenant Services Committee. I'm John Campbell. We're looking for a motion to approve today's agenda. Moved by Marcel. All in favor? Thank you. Are there any declarations of possible conflict of interest? Okay, seeing none. Need a motion to approve the meeting minutes of June the 13th, the public meeting minutes. Moved by, looking for a mover. Moved by Uba, all in favor? Okay, thank you. And then the first item we have on the business arising is we have a deputation from Catherine Wilkinson, I believe.
That's correct. I believe that we have Ms. Wilkinson on the line.
Okay.
Ms. Wilkinson, are you there?
Catherine, are you there with us today?
Jared, I do not see her in the meeting right now.
Okay, well, we can, I'd be happy to come back to this when she gets in. She maybe didn't expect that we'd be there right away.
Okay, so we can hold that matter down if that's the committee's wish.
I think we'll hold that down, okay, for a few minutes. We'll do number 6. So the next item is 6A, which is the Chief Operating Officer's reports and TCHC operational performance measures. And have any committee members any questions of the Chief Operating Officer on this report? Okay, I'm not seeing anybody's hand up. I have a question. Nadia, in regard to the arrears, total current arrears are up slightly over last year. Rent and parking arrears are up slightly from last year. Do we have an understanding as to how many people this involves, or how many households this involves?
So through the chair, thank you for the question. It varies month over month, but typically on any given month, we have between 25 to 30% of our tenancies that are in arrears. We do have some high value accounts. So I would say about the top 5% of the accounts are high value arrears, and those are the ones we typically focus on, because it might just be a late payment that also is reflected in the arrears issues that you see. So yes, I would say about 25 to 30% on average, month over month.
So would it be of any, and I'm going to ask just for you, I mean, I should be saying, I should be offering my opinion, but I want to hear your opinion. Would it be of any value to know the number of households that are in arrears?
So through the chair, we could absolutely report that information. We do have that, and we could also quantify the number of households that are in repayment agreements. So to contextualize that, so you're able to see that we actually are working with the households to ensure they maintain their tenancy. So we can start reporting that future state. Because
I did talk to Melanie about this particular, about asking this question, whether or not it was reasonable to ask that. And she said, she also pointed out it would be interesting to know how much of this, 25+ million are being managed. Is most of it managed, or what percentage of it is sort of not managed yet because it's just accumulated?
So I don't have the exact percentage off the top of my head, but I would say the vast majority are being managed. And so that means they're going through the arrears collection process. So they're at some stage in the arrears collection process, and many of them are in repayment agreements. We talked a little bit, I think 2 meetings ago, about the repayment agreements, and that may or may not be in breach. And so that's an area of work that we're diving into, because we're finding that a significant percentage of the repayment agreements do enter into breach. And so we're trying to ensure that we have supports in place to support the tenant while they're going through the repayment agreement, to ensure they don't go into that concern related to breaching.
Okay, all right. Any other members of the committee have any questions on 6A?
Marcel has his hand up.
Marcel?
I was just wondering, as far as like the when it comes to arrears and tenancy, and you have it together with parking, is there a spot where it's like separated, where it's just parking arrears as opposed to like tenant arrears, or are they just bundled together? Because it'd be a good idea. I'd like to see like the amount of actual parking arrears is being tracked, and then like what is the plan to try and capture some of that?
So thank you for the question, Director Charlebois. So through the chair, we've actually tried to quantify it. So we've tried to break it down in terms of rent and parking arrears. So if you look on table 9, on page 19 of your package, you'll see where it's broken down. And so that is an area we're looking into how to support tenants, because we do have limited parking spaces, as you know, in some of our communities. And so ensuring that tenants are continuing to pay for their parking spaces is something that we're looking into, including potentially limiting access if possible, if they aren't actually paying for their parking. So that's one of the things we're looking at. I think the committee had asked us to dive into that. So I have the team looking into that, but it is articulated in that table.
Thank you. I missed that whole part, so appreciate it. Thanks.
Okay, I think Councillor Fletcher, I can't see you, but I think you had, Sonia, maybe you could take that down. Councillor Fletcher, did you have a comment or a question?
Yeah, I did. Can you not see me, John?
No, we
No,
can.
No, she's got can you take yeah, because everybody has the document on their own screen, I presume. Okay, go ahead, Paula.
Okay. Oh, I see. Because of the document, I thought you meant something here. Thank you. Number of questions. Just on the document, and good morning, Ziva. It's nice to
Yes,
meet you.
good morning,
I didn't meet you
Ziva.
at
Good
the
morning and
beginning.
welcome to the
Welcome.
Tenant Services
Great.
Committee.
Great to have you on board. For great things. The just in the table 1, and I don't know how that's developed. I think we've had this table like this for a while, but it seems to me we have 3 sets of data here. We have 1 to 3B as service requests, and I think it's important that we kind of set out them in data sets because they are 3 very distinct ones. Then we have vacancy rate, rentable, non-rentable, arrears. Those are all money ones. The others are service requests. The money ones are ones that obviously we need to understand very well, service requests as well. And the last 3 really are police and fire calls and crime. So I find when they're all in one big running table that it doesn't allow us to put them together in the buckets that I think we should have them in. And then I think for the financial ones that are chair, that'd be you, John, that you should be working with Adele or the chair of BIFAC to kind of break down financially. And financial issues don't normally come here. So how does that interface with BIFAC around finances and reporting, those kinds of things? And within there, those categories, I just think it's great to have the vacancy rate down, the rentable units, still 708 of them. The non-rentable vacant units, there's a cost to those that we should be quantifying as the cost of redevelopment. It's the cost of redevelopment or cost of keeping those units on the shelf. So what I really want is I want a really clear breakdown of some of those types of costings related to that. If we have 1,000 units that are waiting, somehow involved in our revitalization, I don't know who's paying for those thousands to sit idle. Is that part of the revite payment? Are we being covered for those? Are they only sitting fallow? I don't know if you know the answer to that at the moment, but to me, these are dig-in questions that I think our committee and the board should understand well. I also want to say for the non-rentable, what is the value of the rentable units? What is when we say that some are demolished in that list, I don't know why we would consider a house that's demolished a non-rentable unit. It has a different, you can answer these questions, but it's not a unit anymore. There's nobody who could move in there unless I'm wrong in reading that it's been demolished, and there's a number of them that have been demolished. So those are just on the financial side related to actual locations. I agree in breaking down the arrears very carefully because the rent, is it RGI rent? Is it parking rent? Is it market rent? Is it commercial rent? Because we haven't actually talked about the commercial rent situation here as being one that fell into arrears. Those are different categories. And that is, I think I agree with someone who just said, let's understand how the repayments are going. If they're 50% are on repayment agreements, 100% are on repayment agreements, then basically we're just in a long-term recovery. And how many have come into arrears in the first quarter and the second quarter, and how many have left. I might be wrong, but that's information that I think is important financially for us to be able to say, yes, this is great. And on the number of non-rentable vacant units, that looks like a lot. Some of them are non-rentable. They're non-rentable. Let me just put it like this. Some are non-rentable because we can't put a tenant in there, because the others are non-rentable because we're using them for something else. They're sitting aside for revitalization. They're sitting aside for the staff on site to have a place to store things. I think they're two different categories and we should be managing them, watching that in two different ways. So I think I'm real clear on these ones around the money. I'd like to know that. I'm going to come back in a second with the preventative pest treatments. It's always something, and demand pest treatments. That's a lot of bugs. I don't want to go into it now, but Mr. Chair, I know tenants come to speak to us about it, and it's ongoing and an issue about how well that's actually working for them. And I'm sure it's going to be a conversation at the Tenant Advisory Committee, one of the important ones. I just want to come back to the total arrears rent, and I want to understand the commercial arrears that grew up over COVID. And I don't know, perhaps Alan might be the one.
So through the chair, I know my colleague, the Vice President of Facilities Management, is here, and he should be able to speak to the commercial arrears.
Certainly. Thank you, Nadia, through the chair. Director Fletcher. So the commercial arrears, you're correct. During COVID, they did increase significantly. So prior to COVID, we had about $800,000 in arrears, of which the lion's share, it was almost $500,000, was with one commercial tenant, which was Deep Kwong, which we've worked through the city with and have been able to successfully recover a good portion of that, and we do have an agreement in place where that will all be recovered. We do have approximately, if I look at the same time, at the end of COVID, we're about 3.2 million in arrears, of which we are going through them. We've been working with the city to understand exactly what the city has forgiven in terms of COVID arrears, and we are in the process of preparing a report which we'll bring to our ELT shortly to make a recommendation on what we can do with them, because obviously COVID impacted, a lot of our businesses are small businesses that were definitely negatively impacted during COVID. So we are working through them, but it is a process where we're working through it one by one, because we do need to take a look at each tenant, and we also want to make sure that we're doing what our recommendation is in line with exactly what the city is doing in terms of COVID arrears.
Would the city have the same type of commercial tenants? I don't believe so. We don't have business tenants at the city.
I'm not sure. Okay, I know that
I don't believe they're the same types of arrears. There's probably nonprofits that have relationships with the city, theaters and others, but I don't think that there's actual small businesses, and I don't know how many sites we have, small business commercial sites in our buildings. Do you have any idea what the number is, Alan, please?
I don't have that off the top of my
Okay.
head, like in terms of, you know, exactly what's small business versus a larger business.
Or just, I mean, we don't have 1,000 employees anywhere. They're probably, I don't think we have that in any of our, most of these businesses are on the ground floor of our,
Correct.
yes, so they're going to be ancillary retail to the community, et cetera. Maybe a drugstore, et cetera. But they're
Generally
still pretty
speaking,
small.
yes.
Yeah.
Correct. They're small business. There are some larger chain, you might call them, or a franchise type where you have like a Pizza Hut or a Rabba Fine Foods, for example.
Yes, still.
But they are small. There's
That's
no
right.
1,000 employee business
No.
that is renting space from us.
And then just what the, some of them had to stay open. Some of them could stay open if there was
Correct.
food flood, and then others were closed down completely, the nature of the ones where you could not go in. I think probably Rabba could, I'm just sorry to carry on here, Mr. Chair, but we haven't talked about this. Rabba could stay open. Somebody who's delivering a direct service, that nail salon has to close.
Correct.
Chiropractor stay open, others have to close.
Yeah.
Right? So those things are different if you had an income stream, and I'm not sure we've parsed that down in that way. So,
I agree with you 100%, and that's exactly what we're doing, is looking through. You're exactly right, Director Fletcher. We've got nail salons, they were closed. You've got a Pizza Hut that was open. You've got a Rabba Fine Foods that was open. You've got a dentist who was still able to carry on business during that time. And we do have arrears from all different types of businesses. So that's why we
Yes.
have to, and we have been, I should also indicate that we've entered into payment arrangements with a number of tenants as well, you know, to repay arrears over time. So it's not that we just took the arrears and have left it. We have been working to enter into repayment agreements. And now we're sort of at the point where we've finished getting into repayment agreements that we can. And now we have to take a look at, we are looking at the current arrears, the type of business. Were they in any arrears prior to COVID? Because clearly we're not looking to forgive, you know, that has to be taken into consideration as well. So we're doing it line by line with going through each commercial tenant individually.
and your degree of flexibility, whether they were closed during COVID or open during COVID, do you have a degree of flexibility there, Alan?
That's something that we've discussed, and absolutely, you know, from my perspective and my team's perspective, we need to take that into consideration. If someone was closed, then clearly, you know, they're not able to, they weren't able to generate income versus someone. There may still have been businesses who were open but were impacted by COVID in terms of, you know, just other issues that happened.
Okay.
So it is something that we are looking basically on an individual basis, and that's why it's taking us some time to go through them line by line. But your
Okay.
points are all valid and
Thank you.
absolutely in line with our thinking. So thank you.
I may come back to you on that, but Mr. Chair, just to recap, I'm very interested in setting out our reporting mechanism in a different way, clearly about finances, vacancies, arrears, that's all money. Service requests are service requests, and crimes and fires are a different category, and have a clearer breakdown, particularly around the non-rentable units, and have the arrears broken out by the types of arrears, RGI, market, commercial.
So
Thank you.
I don't, I mean, given that most of our tenants are on RGI, I would have to assume that most of the arrears are RGI units. I mean, I don't know. I mean, something like 86% of tenants are RGI. Is that not correct, Nadia?
So through the chair, you are correct, but we do have a relatively high number of market rent tenant arrears, and we're looking at a strategy specific to those. So I do think it would be helpful to reflect that and to speak to the strategy differently, because it's a slightly different approach that we take. And so I do think we can definitely do some analysis and bring it back to the next meeting. And happy to review the way the information is presented and potentially have a template or draft presented through the chair before the next meeting to ensure that we get it right.
Okay.
Thank you.
And I just want to, oh, yes, Uba, then Debbie.
Good morning, everyone. And my apology if my question is already answered, but when someone owes money, how quick do we ask them to pay that arrears? Is it 2 weeks? Is it 1 month? And let's say if somebody's rent, let's say it's 1,000 and they didn't pay that 1,000, the following months, can they pay that 1,000? And if they don't have the other 1,000, maybe a little bit of the arrears towards that. That's my one question. The other question is, I have seen a lot of tenants who have a lot of arrears, like 10,000, 15,000, 20,000. And they often say, there is no way I can pay this money. Is there any way that TCHC can waive the whole amount because I have this and that circumstance? Or is there a way half of it can go off? And they often hear, no, that's not going to happen. We're not waiving anything. It's just that you have to pay schedule plan. And if somebody owes 15,000 and they said, let me pay 100, I mean, we're never going to get that money. Like it's next to impossible. So is there any room or possibility to waive or maybe half waive? Well, that's my couple. Thank you.
So through the chair, thank you for the question, Director Farah. A couple of things in there. If a tenant is behind on their rent, we issue what we call an N4. It should be between, I believe it's 14 and 17 business days of the month. So if rent's due on April 1st, you should receive communication via letter and communication through your tenant service coordinator through phone calls within the first 50 days. We don't always necessarily meet that. And certainly with the letter being issued, we oftentimes find it's better to actually engage the tenant and talk to the tenant. So you'll see our challenges around compliance reflected through the OACH report around the N4s going out on time, but that's in large part due to some engagement that happens on the ground. So there is communication that happens with the tenants related to that arrears. A situation where they're $1,000 in arrears, that is something that would easily be remedied through a repayment agreement. So we would work with the tenant to arrange a repayment agreement. So it might be $100 a month, like you said, on top of the regular rent, and that would go to pay off the arrears. So that is something that we actively do, and we do with most of the files. To answer your second question, in terms of a tenant that's $15,000 in arrears, we have been working with tenants to issue repayment agreements. Right now, the regions are limited in their ability to do lengthy repayment agreements. And so we're working to address that approval authority so they could approve longer repayment agreement timelines. OACH right now has the ability to approve repayment agreements beyond 2 years, upwards of multi-years. And so that's what we're working with. In terms of writing off arrears, I know that Lily, our Chief Financial Officer, and myself have been having discussions in terms of what that could look like, as opposed to writing it off at a particular amount. Can we look at a time period? So we may be bringing back some additional information to this committee to consider in terms of some particular arrears or sections of arrears or areas that are really difficult to recover for analysis and support. And again, there, to Councillor Fletcher's earlier point, I think there's some complexity with BIFAC, because some of these conversations we did have with BIFAC in terms of writing off arrears, but we are looking into different avenues to do that. So I see Lily Chen has joined. I don't know, Lily, if you wanted to add anything to that.
Thank you, Nadia. So we will also be looking at the different types of arrears in terms of the past and current. Work are already underway. We also have reached out to Hamilton and Ottawa to get a sense of their current policy, procedure, and practices, which we can potentially learn and apply in our cases as well.
Okay. Other committee, Debbie, you had a question, I believe.
Yes, I do. A couple of questions, Nadia. I'm looking at table 8. Will you explain to us the difference between unmanaged and managed arrears? And then what's the difference between managed arrears and a repayment agreement? And then my last question is, I'm so surprised that with the 3 regions, the Eastern region seems to be so out of whack in terms of highest unmanaged arrears, lowest, of course, then it makes sense that it has lowest managed arrears. What's happening in the Eastern region?
So perhaps, thank you for the question, Director Douglas, through the chair. I will address the last question first and then go to the original question. So in terms of the East, we are down a supervisor. So the other regions, we were able to add an additional supervisor. So they have 3 supervisors in the Central and West region. We are working to get that backfill in place to support the East region. They also inherited quite a bit of contract managed buildings that came online last year, more so than Central and certainly the West. And so they're working to catch up with a bit of a backlog. So we're working to support them in terms of staffing, but also address the backlog in terms of the issues that they're seeing. In terms of managed versus unmanaged, so unmanaged are arrears that have been accumulated, but we haven't initiated the arrears collection process. So imagine to Uba's example, or sorry, Director Farah's example, around a tenant that's $1,000 in arrears, we haven't issued an N4. We haven't worked with them to establish a repayment agreement. So in these cases, we really want to get our unmanaged arrears as low as possible. They should almost be real time, because the idea is that we want to make sure that we're engaging with the tenant to actually get the arrears repaid. So one of the measures of success for us is that we're actually working with the tenant. So it's an indicator of whether we are actively engaging that household to pay off the arrears. So in terms of repayment agreements versus managed arrears, I believe the repayment agreements are a component of the managed arrears. I don't think they're on top of them. So one of the different areas you could be in the stage where we're issuing an N4. You could have a repayment agreement. You can be in different stages of the process. And so I'm happy to kind of walk us through, potentially, if that's helpful, bring a bit of a presentation to the committee next time to kind of walk us through the managed process, so you see where tenants are in the system.
That would be very helpful.
Okay, happy to do that.
Thanks for that.
Okay, any further questions? No, okay. Yes, Councillor Fletcher.
Just one more question, and when somebody's late by 3 days, 4 days in their rent, what's the process then? Do they get immediately just a letter spit out to them that they're late? Do they get it dropped in their mailbox? What happens?
So through the chair, thank you for the question, Councillor Fletcher. Our initial initiation step with the tenant is typically about 2 weeks later, where there's expectation of engagement related to the arrears and the N4 being issued. So there is communication attempts. I would say 3 days is early. We also have been able to identify that some of the bulk payments, we're not able to get them necessarily credited to the month, because we might get it on, say, a Friday and it's a long weekend. And so we're working with finance to ensure that tenants' accounts are credited as early as possible. So what we've been able to identify is issuing an N4 prior to at least 2 to 3 weeks post the beginning of the month isn't always accurate, because we might have a payment that came in late that was intended for the previous month from ODSP or OW. So the updated arrears collection process that we will bring to the committee that we're working on right now should reflect a more prolonged timeline, so that we can ensure that we're not issuing false N4s or prematurely issuing N4s where the tenant is actually in line with their rent payment. We just received it late. So that is something we're looking at.
Sorry, how long have you been taking to send an N4? And N4 is telling you.
I believe our current arrears collection process requires the N4 to be sent between 14 to 17 days after the beginning of the month. And we're finding that at times catches individuals who have paid and we're still processing payments. We're also finding it difficult for the TSCs at times to actually meet that timeline, because they're using the time to engage the tenant. So for example, they may call and say, yes, okay, I'll give you guys a payment. And so we don't necessarily issue it within the 14 to 17 day timeline, because we are in communication with the tenant. And so we're looking at whether the arrears collection process could be amended to reflect a more realistic timeline, and giving the tenants as well as the TSCs opportunities to engage with each other before then.
I'm just going to ask Jag, in the commercial world or tenant world, when your rent's supposed to be in on the 1st, or is there that lag time understood that might be there? It might be in the mail. It might be being credited. What's the industry standard, I'll ask.
So thank you, Councillor Fletcher, for the question, and through the chair. Yes, absolutely. There are the same complexities in whether it be the private sector world or other housing providers. And what Nadia has outlined is accurate, that we need some flexibility because there are instances in which just a long weekend and posting of payments will start to trigger our process where we need to refine that because our tenants are actually in good standing, yet it's the systems that are creating an unnecessary start to a process. And so those are the efforts that we're undertaking now, is to ensure that we are amending our processes to take into consideration those instances that do occur.
Okay, I just want to say one thing if I can, Mr. Chair.
Yes,
about this,
Council.
and just the impact on tenants. So I think that our staff, TCHC staff, can see if somebody's somebody who's kind of late all the time or falling into arrears, or that person always needs a bit of a push because we don't want them to fall in. So they have they're chronically arreared and may miss payments, etc. That's a category. There's tenants who've always been in good standing, and then for some reason that check didn't get there or it's late, something. I can only tell you, and I'm going to look at the tenants that I see in front of me, when a long-standing, good standing, or in good standing tenant gets that letter right away that says you're behind, it's shocking to them. They feel, they just feel like, oh my God, I've been a good tenant. I've paid my rent all the time. What's going to happen to me? Our tenants are, you know, I'm just, particularly today with cost of living so high and everybody's concerned they're living near the edge, that's just a pressure that they don't need. If you're having trouble paying, get in touch with your tenant. We're expecting, it's just a different type of letter than I've seen somebody run up to me and say, oh my God, I've always been on time. What are they doing? Why? They're embarrassed. They feel bad.
So in other words,
they're
you're saying
worried.
it should just be a reminder note, friendly reminder, your rent is past
Right
due.
away, friendly reminder, your rent's past due. Expect, if we need to hear from you by X date, X. Maybe that's changed since I've seen that, but it did shake me up a lot when someone was very upset like that. So I think Nadia wants to answer that one. And I know this is very fine-grained detail, but we are dealing with people who have a lot of stress and pressure in their lives financially.
So through the chair, thank you for that comment, Councillor Fletcher, and I agree. We did historically have a process where we sent reminder letters before the N4, and through the review of the most recent arrears collection process, it was identified by OACH, as well as the committee putting it together, that we were issuing too many letters. So a tenant might have 2 reminders before they got the N4, and sometimes that was creating some concern for the tenant as well. And so we do have a cover letter that goes with the N4 that tries to do exactly what you're suggesting, Councillor Fletcher, to contextualize it so we can work with the tenant. But we are, again, looking at the arrears collection process to determine whether we put that step back in. But we did have, I believe, 2 or 3 reminders historically before the N4, and it was removed from the process I think it happened 2 years ago where we updated the ACP. And so we're going to be looking at whether we need to put that letter back in. But currently there's a cover letter that goes with the N4.
Wow. Okay. I didn't realize, because this was before 2 years, I didn't know they were starting right with an N4, which is starting the eviction for the tenant. I think that this is something not to deal with the OACH, because as you pointed out, John, 86% of our tenants are RGI tenants, and it means the service manager is responsible, and we report to the service manager, which is this case the city, who manages the RGIs on behalf of the province. And I think that's a conversation there as to what's the best method. It's not just left up to the OACH.
Okay.
Thank you. Jag had a comment. You didn't. Okay.
Yeah, just quickly, and with some latitude, Chair Campbell, just Nadia had mentioned it earlier to potentially draft an updated report, but I think from an arrears perspective, we had discussed in the past almost a workshop type approach where we bring the data sets and have a deeper dive with the committee. And I think that would still be a worthwhile effort, just to look at some of the different trending information that's available and how the committee would like to see more data. because I do think we are getting much better as to how we're looking at data, and we want to be in line with the committee as to the not only the reports but the trending that we present and how we're focusing our efforts.
Okay, so just before we leave this item, Nadia, I almost want to apologize for my question about how much we're managed, because of course that's shown in table 8, what is managed and what is unmanaged. And then also we talked about, we spoke about the difference between the percentage difference between RGI and market, and that's shown in table 9 as well. So I don't know, aside from having actual numbers put to these statistics, I'm not sure which more information would be helpful. Did you have any comment on that?
So through the chair, thank you for the question and the correction. I do think informing the committee about our strategies and
Right.
our success rate related to market rent versus RGI would be helpful to contextualize. I think given the comments from Councillor Fletcher, I think if we look at changing the format of the report a little bit, we can make it a little bit clearer, so you at least have the sense whether we're moving in the right direction or not. And to Jack's point, if we do a workshop, that can maybe initiate it. But I do think it would be helpful for you to understand whether we're starting to see an increasing trend in market versus RGI and contributing factors. And so that's something that I can work with the team on.
Okay, and then just one last comment. I noticed the vacancy rate overall is down to 1.65%, which is very, very low. Staff is to be certainly commended for that. That's great work. I don't know if you have a target. I mean, I don't know how low it can go, because there's always going to be people on the move in such a large, with such a large number of units. I mean, is it possible it can go any lower than that?
Yeah, so we were at 1.5%, 1.51% in May, and our June numbers are 1.45%. So I would
Okay.
say that, because you guys are sort of lagged in the reporting, I would say that is probably the thinnest margin that we could reflect. To
Right.
Councillor Fletcher's point, I think the focus needs to be getting units out of circulation back into the system as quickly as possible, so we increase the amount of inventory available to get to the waiting list. So now that we are, I would say, as razor thin as we could probably get realistically, I really want to do a deeper dive into the units out of circulation.
Okay, and sorry, Uba, I saw a little yellow hand from you. Did you have a question, Uba?
No,
No. Okay.
I'm challenged when it comes to technology. I was trying to clap the fact that the errors went down, and then instead I raised my hand.
You can do this, okay? This is good. All right.
Hey, let me practice. Why not?
Sure, Campbell. I think
All right.
if I may, just with a bit of latitude once again, just to say, one of the things that we need to be cautious about is setting too low a threshold or expectation. There's so many factors. I think it's more important to have a solid handle on what's driving vacancies and being sure that we are kind of on top of it. The industry threshold right now is in the area of 2%. And, so from a staff perspective, they're doing incredibly well to be below the industry threshold. And I think we just need to continue this type of focus in order to keep it as low as possible.
And so sorry to belabor this point, but Nadia, how many units typically, do you have a ballpark figure on how many units turn over every month?
So through the chair, there is a number. It slipped my mind, but I can get that back to you.
I'm curious to know how many people are leaving for new housing or leaving for for purposes of getting living somewhere else in the city or what have you, and then how many new people we're bringing in to TCHC accommodation. Okay. All right.
One last question, John, on that. Is what's the number of units that we turned over for the rapid housing over, and are those folks we put in there still there? I know we were taking people from the shelter system and we made units available. 300 seems to stick in my mind, but.
So through the chair, I believe this year we are closer to 500. Richard, I don't know if you have the number off the top of your head. I think historically we were working with TSHC as well when they were part of TCHC. And I think last year our target was 600. And I believe this year our TCHC alone is 500. There's a fairly low eviction rate for those tenancies, but we have an overall fairly low eviction rate as well. I can definitely bring that information back to the committee in terms of updates in the next report.
Are they receiving supports or are they simply moved in?
So the program comes with 1 year of community agency support that's facilitated through the city. We do have a small team internally to operations that supports the onboarding and the tenancies and for example, the furniture delivery and different pieces of the logistics on our side. We are finding that there might be additional supports required because they may or may not be engaging with the service that they are attached to, and also other supports in the community, particularly communities where there are higher prevalence of these types of tenancies. And so we're working with the service manager and service providers to look at an anchor agency model to support buildings that might be disproportionately have disproportionate levels of vulnerable tenancies. So I would say ideally it works really well. We have tenants that come in and transition with the supports, but there are instances where we're finding that the additional support required for them to maintain successful tenancies are slightly beyond our current structure. And so I know we've been working with JAG and others to look at different models on how we support those types of tenancies.
Yeah, John, if I may, Paula Stan, thanks for raising this. I was going to ask that question offline of Nadia. You saying that we're around 500. Is there a cap for that program?
So I believe that's the annual quota for the year. So every year we're given a target. And again, I'm sorry, I'm looking at any of my team if they have the numbers. So I just got a text. We have a 97% stability rate in terms of the tenancies. Let me see if the numbers are here. The target for 2023 is 450, and last year the target was 300.
And the targets is determined by City Council?
It's determined by the service manager working with our team. So it goes through the Housing Secretariat.
Okay, it's through the Housing Secretariat. I'm asking these questions because we're so desperately in need of shelter, especially for refugees, as many of you may have heard. So we're scouring, we're looking everywhere to see how it is that we can begin to alleviate some of the nonsense that's happening downtown in front of 129 Peter Street.
So through the chair, we do have Jen St. Louis from the Housing Secretariat. She's here to speak to the Tenant Advisory Committee. But Jen, I don't know if you have any comments or thoughts on this item.
Sorry, I'm having some technical difficulties here. I do not. It's all good.
Okay, well, we've spent a lot of time on this particular item. We'll have a motion to receive this information on 6B from the Chief Operating Officer's report, moved by Debbie. All in favor? Okay, thank you.
Nadia, thank you.
Thank you.
Now I noticed, Dara, we have Catherine Wilkinson on the line, and we can go back to the item that she wanted to make a deputation about. That was in 5. Dara?
That's correct. Yes, Ms. Wilkinson, I can see you've joined the meeting. If you wanted to make your deputation on item number 5.
Yes, good morning. My apologies. I don't think we've ever started the public meeting right on time before. You caught me off guard. But good for you. Things are getting better. I do want to congratulate JAG for leaving us, or actually for taking on the responsibility for building more housing. And I did want to welcome Tom, but I don't see him. And just to warn him that if he comes to Toronto Community Housing, we might not let him go back to the seniors portfolio. So welcome everyone. I didn't even make any notes on this issue. At the previous meeting, there was a report speaking to CCTV lobby camera access for tenants. It was received, we discussed it, it was dealt with. But on the action item list, there was 2 items on CCTV. One was related to staff access in terms of community safety and tenants going to staff about issues. And Councillor Fletcher had requested that both of those items had been left on the action item list. So when I spoke at the last meeting, I said we're discussing one but not the other. It should remain on that action item list. And what is pending about that issue is the fact that staff had committed to sit down with our labor partners and discuss strategies, a way that they could compromise and collaborate to ensure the building needs were met. So that meeting hadn't happened. There was no report back to the committee. And for that reason, that action item list should be put back on your action item list. I guess unless Councillor Fletcher has decided it doesn't need to be.
Okay, all right. Thank you for that deputation. Any questions of the deputy?
I'm just going to clarify with you, Catherine. So it was the CCTV that staff used to be able to access to have almost real time what's gone on in that community has now been removed from their ability to look at it and was only through the CSU and then back to the staff. That's what I remember. And we were trying to find a way to give staff, our on the ground staff, the ability to review the CCTV in much closer time without all the red tape. Is that what we were talking about? I have that recollection. Sorry.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Fletcher. I think there was a proposal that management had found a way to allow site staff to view it, but not record it. They were looking at that option, and that's really the issue, is the attachment to MIFIP of the Privacy Act, that people aren't looking at these, issues or downloading them. So there was a way that they were looking at how they could meet the building needs and still manage that privacy factor. So there was a meeting to be held. I don't know if it was held. A report didn't come back. Yeah.
So that's what you'd like to have still pending here, the report back of that.
Well, yeah, we
Yes,
keep
right?
to the server. Yeah.
That's what you're asking for here.
Yes.
Thank you. I got it. Thank you.
Any other questions of the deputy? Okay, thank you, Catherine. We'll return to you later. And now we'll move on to item 6B.
Oh, no, I'm going to ask why it's not there. It's not on the list.
I guess we can ask Dara that. We don't normally ask questions of staff right after. Okay, go ahead, Dara.
I'm sorry. If you're leaving this item, which is item what?
5.
5.
Yeah.
And maybe you already passed it and we've let the deputant speak after. But
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah,
just Pardon?
Yep, it's reasonable. That's okay. We'll ask staff the
Thank you.
question.
I just want to know where that item is, that perhaps it could go back on this list, John. That's what
Yeah.
I'd like to ask. It go back on for the next time. Thank you.
So through the chair, I'm currently looking at the action item list from the June 13th Tenant Services Committee. I'm not sure that I see in that document the matter to which Ms. Wilkinson is referring, but we will go back and check against the action item list and the minutes of the last meeting. And for the next meeting, we'll make sure that the action item list is accurately representing the matters that are outstanding.
Okay.
So thank you, John. I'm not sure I hear that it's going to go on. So I'm going to ask that because site staff at times just have to see what's gone on right away. They can't wait for the CSU to come down and do all the different things. I think we all understand that. So this process that got changed, and I'm not sure what site staff want either. So I would like to make sure that rather critical thing around safety, antisocial behavior, garbage dumping, all those kinds of things that you have ability to see and decide what to do doesn't have to go up to whatever the name of that Caterpillar Drive or whatever it is first. So I just want a commitment, Mr. Chair, that will go on as an explanation, or this will just ride on unnecessarily here.
We could do that, Dara.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank
All right. So now we'll go on to item 6B. And do we have Miguel for his deputation, Dara?
I don't see Mr. Avila in the meeting.
Okay. So now he did ask us to hold this, so we are at probably later than we anticipated anyway. But is there? Do we have a staff presentation on this item?
So through the chair, there's no staff presentation. It's the typical update report that we give at every TSC, but I'm happy to take any questions.
Okay, are any questions on the item? Well, I think what we'll do we know, Dara, if we're going to hear from Miguel, or should we come back to this? I guess maybe we should just come back to this item and
I
move
believe in
on.
the communication that we had with him, he'd asked us to hold it down. He thought he would be able to join after 9:15. It's
Okay,
now 9:36.
okay, well, given that he was in the washroom the last time when I moved past him and he was unhappy, we'll just, we'll move on and we'll try to come back to him. We'll come back to this item. So we'll move on to the tenant brief, because I don't want to make him unhappy 2 times in a row, right? So, all right, so we'll go on to the tenant engagement refresh. And, yep, Nadia?
Thank you, Chair Campbell. So the attached report provides updates about the ongoing work in the tenant engagement system. It includes an update on the community action tables, as well as our volunteer policy, as well as the review that's underway. We also have a fairly comprehensive update on the tenant advisory committee, and so we thought we would do that through a presentation, a joint presentation with the city, the Housing Secretariat, represented by Emily Goss and Jen St. Louis, and our manager of tenant engagement, Julia Regoris. So they're going to walk us through a short presentation, and happy to take any questions. I see Dara's hand though.
Yep. Dara?
Just before we go there, we did have a deputation request on item 6C from Veronica Hearing. I don't know.
Oh, I see that.
I
Okay.
don't know if Ms. Hearing is in the meeting.
You say she is in the meeting or is not?
No, I don't know. I don't see her in the
I don't
meeting.
see her either.
I
Okay.
want to make sure before.
So
we move on.
let's go to the presentation, and then we can always come to the deputant at the end. All right, thank you, Nadia. That's the presentation I was thinking of.
Great, thank you.
Okay.
Over to you, Emily and Julio.
Great, thanks so much. Does Sonia have a copy of the presentation? Perfect. There we go. So thanks so much to the committee for inviting us to come and give you an update on the Tenant Advisory Committee. There's been lots of work underway on this over the past several months, and we're really excited to share the update with you. So next slide, please. Next slide, please, Sonia. Oh. Thanks so much. A bit of a technical. So today's presentation is just going to give you an overview of the TAC as well as the initial recruitment that took place in 2022. We'll then talk about the 2023 recruitment process that's been underway. We'll give you an overview of the applications that have been received as part of the recruitment processes, an update on the application shortlisting, and then an overview of next steps. Now we can go to slide 3. Perfect. Thanks, Sonia.
Thank you very much. So in terms of the purpose of the Tenant Advisory Committee, our goal is to establish a Tenant Advisory Committee that will support TCHC with implementation of the refreshed tenant engagement system. To that effect, we started the recruitment process as early as August 2022, where our goal was to identify interest tenants from 3 regions of operation. We did that successfully to the end of the recruitment of 15 members. They all had an info session December last year, where we discussed future stage of the committee. Thanks.
Thanks, Sonia. So around the time that initial recruitment process was wrapping up, there was a member motion moved at Toronto City Council asking city staff to review a proposal for the TAC. So the city staff went off and did that work and reported back, and recommendations were considered by City Council in March of 2023. And one of those recommendations directed that TCHC, in partnership with the city, complete an additional round of recruitment. And the objective of the additional round of recruitment was really to target was to seek broader representation at the TAC and to target tenants that may not currently be connected to TCHC's engagement system. So the city and TCHC have worked very collaboratively and in partnership on that. There was quite extensive outreach done over the spring, so it included a range of tactics, including posters in buildings, updated information on the TCHC website, social media posts, information in the TCHC tenant newsletter, targeted communications to tenants in leadership roles or tenant reps to cast a wide net, as well as 2 information sessions. And right around the time of in mid-May, as we were coming to the deadline for applications, there was direction from TCHC's Governance, Communication and HR Committee to extend that deadline, as some tenants may have been having trouble with the online form. So the deadline was extended to June 16th, and there was a 3rd information session held on June 8th. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Emily. To that, in terms of the outreach, the 2nd and 3rd round of outreach, as you can see, we have overall a total of 126 applicants. You can see that very thankful to a new website. We learned, there were a couple of learning through this process. We learned that the repetition of the message to different channels, it produces a stronger result. We also are very thankful to the new website that have mobile capability. We have our tenant population, about 65 to 70% of our tenants access our current website through their mobile. So those were factors that help us through this process of outreach and marketing. Thanks.
Great. So the applications closed, the application process closed in mid-June, and the city and TCHC have been working collaboratively to review the applications and to shortlist them. So we've reviewed all the applications. The evaluation team was joint, so it included Julio as the manager of the tenant engagement systems, as well as the 3 regional managers of community safety and support, as well as 2 city staff, so myself and a programs coordinator from the Housing Secretariat. And our review assessed the overall qualifications of the applicants, including also an equity lens to ensure that diverse representation in the group that was shortlisted for interviews.
In terms of next steps, we are conducting interviews of successful applicants the week of July 10th. The week of July 17th, we are starting communication regarding the outcomes of that application. So the new members will be informed, and communication will go to all applicants regarding the status of their application. The week of July 17th, we will commence engagement through the 3 tenant directors regarding the Tenant Advisory Committee. We are aiming for an orientation session with members to be held before the end of the month, July. And we are aiming to work through the month of August with the group to develop the terms of reference for the Tenant Advisory Committee. And our goal is to have our first meeting in September with our new CEO and the new DCM. As co-chairs.
Okay, thank you. Questions from committee members? Councillor Fletcher.
Yes, thanks for the presentation. And just to be clear, because Ziva is new, that all 3 tenant board members are on the Tenant Advisory Committee by virtue of them being tenant board members, correct? Jen? Yeah.
Hello?
Yes, all tenant directors will be invited to join the committee.
I can see that, and I just don't have the presentation. Thank you for going the extra mile on all of this. I think that we have seen quite a bit more interest by round 2 and then even round 3, including what I would say in round 1. If we look at that chart, there was only 4 tenants that applied from the West in round one. And then up to round, by the time we're done with everything, there's 35 tenants from the west that I'm sure, I just don't know if they're from discrete communities. I'd like that. Is everybody from one community, or are the 35 tenants broken out around different geographic communities? Probably Julio might know that best.
Thank you, Councilor Fletcher, for the question. In terms of the diversification of the community, we're looking at a few things. We're looking at, in terms of the demographics, we're looking at also addresses. We have a couple of applicants that are coming from communities that we don't see representation often, and those are given priority, given the mandate to expand the representation of the community. So yes, we're looking to make sure that there's no pockets of the portfolio represented at the committee, but rather a broader representation throughout our portfolio.
Yes, and I'm going to go in a different direction here, but when I'm looking at that in the 41, and I know you're going to be careful that not all of the members are coming from one community. That would not be what you're looking for. But of those 41, do you have a sense if there's clusters there? Maybe 5 coming from one place and 2 from another, or are they pretty spread out, those applications themselves?
It's a combination. We see clusters from one community, and then we see spread applications as well. So okay. It's a combination of both.
Because I think what we have here now, besides the central one, which I think, thank you very much for going through this larger process, because I think we've going to have a broader one. But when I look at the region, we also have an ability you have an ability, I don't, that I know that you held the meetings, Nadia, in the spring. You had an east and a west and a central, and probably a lot of people that were there that come and put their names in here. So besides having your very central ongoing one, you do have people that are interested in by region. And it just seems to me that you're going to select the ongoing tenant advisory committee in the way that you're selecting it. But is there a use of having people that have indicated their interest to the level they've indicated it, be able to meet geographically as well in order to just deepen tenant connections with the corporation? That's my first question.
So through the chair, thank you for the question and suggestion, Councillor Fletcher. We are looking at other avenues of engagement for the applicants that are unsuccessful. In speaking to Julio, I know in working with the city, we are interested in whether there's a mechanism that they could feed into TAC somehow or meet to share information as well, because not all of them are connected to our current tenant engagement system. So these are individuals we would very much like to continue to engage with. So I know the team is working on that, and I can bring an update to the next meeting, but that is absolutely something we're considering.
It's kind of like a mini group. It's like stakeout. So what we have at the city, we have stakeholder groups for larger things. So prior to going to your West meeting, you have a stakeholder group that you'd say, here's the agenda, what do we fix? It's just a very useful number of people to have there. And the second thing is it is about tenant engagement, to refresh that, but I don't know if Tom Hunter's on here, but for the Seniors Advisory Committee, I think one of the things that they really assist with is how best to communicate to tenants. That's one of their foundational roles at the Seniors Corporation. So I don't know when and where there might be additional things that the tenant advisory or the tenant advisory committee itself, actually, once established, will let you know what other things that they also think they should be advising on besides the tenant advisory, besides the refresh. Do you know what I'm saying? And maybe I'm not being so clear, but their mandate is for the refresh, but there should be communications and a few other things established that they could give advice to on the corporation, I think. And I'm looking at Jen nodding, and maybe between Nadia and Jen, or Nadia and Julio, that could just be looked at a little bit for the conversation.
Okay.
Because a lot of work has gone into finding these people. Like, we've done a tremendous amount of work to find what we'll call the tenants who are the most interested in this. And thank you, Julio, for your patience, because you've had a lot of patience from going from the first to the end. But at the end, with the patience that everybody's used, I just think we have a larger, a more interested pool of tenants that are, I'll just call, committed to moving things forward. So thank you, everybody, for that.
Any other comments or questions from committee members? No, I'd like to know, do these, will any of these members, or do these members receive any sort of compensation or honorarium for their time when coming to these meetings?
Thank you for the question, Chair. Yes, we are providing an honorarium for their commitment as for recognition in terms of their time commitment as they are advising on key business of our corporation. Yes.
And how much is the honorarium?
We haven't settled that yet. It's supposed to be a one-time stipendium that they will receive, and that's to be determined.
Sorry, a one-time what?
A one-time payment that they will receive. And once we settle on the amount, we want to make sure that we are in line with city practices and whatnot. We will communicate that.
So how many times a year will they be meeting?
That is, thank you. That is to be determined through the development of the terms of reference. So we are undertaking that process during the months of August, and we will have that.
So if you give them a one-time amount, whether it's $250 or $200 or $500 or what have you, if you give them that one-time amount, there's less of an incentive to show up the next time, right? Whereas if it's on a per meeting basis, whatever that amount is, I don't know how you're going to determine that amount, then obviously there's an incentive to show up every time, right? So.
Thank you for that.
I mean, it just makes sense, right? I mean, if somebody gets their $500, then they're not so keen to, or they're not perhaps so interested or, or committed to show up the next time. So, okay. I mean, and how are you going to determine the amount and of the honorarium? Will that include, perhaps transit pass or something of that nature?
Absolutely. We take in consideration transportation. As we aiming to have our meetings in person. And we also will look at best practices in terms of what other city agencies do around honorarium for that.
Yeah, and Julio, childcare as well.
Absolutely. Yes, that includes, it's part of our calculation. Yes. Thank you.
Okay. All right. So now we don't have the deputant, do we?
I just have that question about childcare. Are we going to be having on-site childcare? Development applications where a developer has to come to the community. That's one of the things that they have to have, some snacks, some childcare. So if tenants are coming together, that's on site. I think that's what you're talking about, Julio. I just want to be clear.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you, Councilor. Yes, that's exactly it.
Perfect. Thank you.
Dara, do we have Veronica?
So we have a call-in user 3 who's joined the meeting. I'm not sure who that is, whether that's Ms. Hearing. They're muted at present. And so I'm going to ask if they can unmute themselves. I believe if you press *6 from your phone, you should unmute.
Hello.
Hello, is this Veronica?
Yes, it is. How are you?
We're good. Thank you, Veronica. It's John Campbell here. We're happy to receive your deputation on the tenant engagement update.
Yes, I wanted to talk about the tenant engagement because in my community, it's a real problem. We have a group of people that are running the building, and they're bullying a lot of the tenants in the building. And I was doing a lot of the gardening around here. They said they got approval from Joseph Greer that they can go ahead and do whatever they want. So they ripped up all the Toronto housings, flowers from before, and put their own. And they apparently the reason they got this money is because Stacy Grant went ahead and applied for the TAF funding. But I already had $1,000 in TAF funding ready for the flowers. So now I'm getting abused by these guys, physically as well as mentally. And the people in this building are tired. We need to have an end to this tenant engagement, these committees, because the building committee and the gardening committee are the same people. And they're always bad-mouthing us. They're always causing trouble for us. And then when we ask local management, especially Mr. Greer, he looks the other way. And he doesn't do anything about it. We've been asking him for a year and a half to deal with this issue, and he just doesn't do anything. So we need an end to the committees, because before all this stuff happened, we had a better building. People did their gardening the way they wanted to. Then people wanted to do the flowers, did the flowers. And there was none of all this fighting. It's all started since they brought in the tenant engagement system, and we need an end put to it now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We'll have somebody from staff follow up with you, Veronica.
I'm working with Kevin Leonard for a long time, and he's a really nice guy, but it's taken a lot of time because he's tied up with a lot of the human rights stuff. I met Julio at the human rights meeting, and he wanted to talk to me about Joseph then, but I didn't have time because my wheel trans was coming. And he keeps saying he'll set up a meeting, but he never follows through. So we have to come to
you know what, we'll have somebody from the staff will contact you again to follow up after the meeting. I'm sure that's safe to assume, Nadia.
Absolutely, Chair Campbell. And Veronica, we will be in touch this week.
Yeah, well, we need to end these committees. We can't go on this. I can't even leave the building. I had to call the security to get back in the building yesterday.
Yep, somebody will.
This is getting out of hand.
Okay. All right. Thank you for calling in today, Veronica, and thank you for bringing that to staff's attention again. Okay. So need a motion to receive the tenant engagement refresh. Motion from one of the committee members. Councillor Fletcher, you want to make that motion? Okay. All in favor? Thank you. And next item, we'll move on to 7A. Tenant update on tenant-led improvements in basement spaces. I know that Uba, this was an item of particular interest to you, and you've sort of driven this. Just wondering, do you have any questions of staff on this report?
When I look at the report, I see we're same space that we were before, like back to square one. And what I gather was staff is not willing to put this forward because there are different concerns. But I don't see personally the concerns if tenants are paying money out of pocket, if they're going to be compliant with TCHC rules and regulations, if they're going to get the the permit from the city with the help of TCHC. So
this talks about a pilot program. Could we just get perhaps just get a little bit of Alan, a little bit of elaboration on how that's going to work and when we might have more information on that?
Certainly. Thank you, Chair Campbell and Director Farah. So we where it is currently, as the report says, is that we have reached out to the Housing Secretariat's office to ensure that they would be on side with moving ahead with a pilot. The pilot, if we were to move ahead with it, would require that the tenant, identify that they're interested in participating in this program. They would need to demonstrate that they have sufficient funds in order to be able to complete the design, which would be required for the permit. And then based on the design, there would be an approximate construction cost, which the tenant would then need to be able to identify that they had sufficient funding available in order to pay for the renovations We'd have to figure out how we would be able to structure that in order so that the funds could, be kept in like escrow or something like that in order to ensure that there's funding to have the renovation completed. And then we would have to arrange to have the inspections, and obviously that would also be done through the permit process. It is, we do believe that the options that we've given would allow for space to be improved so that it could be more usable. We do still, though, have concerns regarding completing full renovations. And, if we wish to go ahead with it, we can do the pilot. And as I say, the first step would be to identify which tenants were interested in it, and then to ensure that they had the funding available to complete the work up front.
Thank you, Alan. Okay, so we've been in touch with the Housing Secretariat's office, and where does that go, and when does that come back, and how long is that? I mean, that should be a fairly brief conversation, I would think.
We have sent it over to the Housing Secretariat's office. We haven't heard officially back from them. I know that they're reviewing it, so I expect that we'll probably have something back shortly. Actually, I see Jen has her hand up, so maybe she has some information about that.
Thanks, Alan. So we are reviewing it, and just to be clear, one of the potential negative impacts of this is creating an additional bedroom. So the provincial legislation provides for occupancy standards in social housing units. And so we wouldn't want this to actually create something that changes the size of the unit and then have a tenant be negatively impacted if they become overhoused. So if at some point they don't have enough people for that size of unit. So we are reviewing this with city legal. It's a bit more complicated because of the provincial regulations. So we will, I think we'll probably respond, Alan, in the next couple of weeks. We just want to be sure that there are no potential unforeseen negative impacts to tenants and households.
Okay, I mean, obviously, if somebody's asking for an extra bedroom, it's because they, have one too many people around, and they want to give somebody some privacy, right? Not because they have too few people around, right?
I agree, but household composition does change, and so at that point, would we remove the renovation so someone could stay in their home and not have that extra bedroom? So there's just a bit of a kind of process in terms of eligibility that we would need to review.
And then, is there any thinking on the part of staff that if they change a 3-bedroom to a 4-bedroom, that we would charge them more money, or would we sort of waive that, would we sort of, not carry through with that? What has any position been taken on that?
Through you, Chair Campbell, we haven't had those specific discussions, and that would be something, though, that we would have to take into consideration. I'm not familiar exactly with with how everything works with the rent, but I'd absolutely work with Nadia and her team on that. I mean, I don't know, Nadia, if your team has had any discussions on it, or.
So through the chair, we have, and the number of bedrooms does determine rate of rent. However, household composition determines. So for example, if you add a bedroom, but you still have underage tenants, for example, it may not actually increase your rent. So it depends on the household composition. So it's a little bit more complicated than just the number of bedrooms. So we would have to look at it on a case-by-case basis.
John, may I? I'm surprised we're talking about this, because if I add a room to my basement, I may use it as a study space. Some people may sleep in it, others they may not. It may not be consistent. How do we determine that a room is a bedroom versus a study or a playroom or any of those things? I was looking through the list of conditions, and it feels as if for this pilot, we're just putting a set of barriers in people's way. So why, for example, would I need to engage a consultant to design a renovation of a basement if all I'm trying to do is to put up some dry plaster so that it's a bit safer for my children to play? You see, so I understand working with a contractor that's licensed. I understand those kinds of things. I understand having the tenants sign off to say, yes, we have the money to be able to do this because TCHC won't pick up the cost. But why are we putting these on what seems to me to be just barriers to this process? My sense is TCHC has been hesitant from the beginning. This conversation has been happening for over 2 years. And so now that we're looking at a pilot, if the Housing Secretariat, Jen and her shop signs off, shouldn't we be trying to facilitate our tenants being able to do this, rather than making it very difficult for them to participate in any pilot? And I must say that as a board member, I would have great difficulty with having people put money in escrow. TCHC is not a legal firm, and I think that sets up tenants in terms of them wanting to make the space that they're in a bit more comfortable and usable.
Thank you, Director Douglas, and through the chair, I can speak to or try to answer some of your comments. So the information of what can be done that's listed in the report, that's what we were proposing tenants could do without, it would not require a permit, and it would allow tenants to make the space more usable. There are concerns with a room being a bedroom because there are certain fire code regulations that are required in order, if someone's using that space as a bedroom, and has to make sure that it is safe in the event of a fire. The items that we were proposing, the painting of existing walls or installing drapes or flooring, general decorating, using furniture placement to coordinate off a space or cordon off a space, those don't require a permit, and those we agreed could be done.
I understand that. I'm actually speaking to the last part of your report. If a pilot is to be on, I'm talking about the pilot, it would entail applying for a permit, TCHC itself applying for a permit from as the owner of the property. Tenants would need to prove that they have sufficient funding for the renovations to, one, engage the services of a consultant to design the renovations, pay for the permits, engage the services of a contractor to complete the work, and then, of course, TCHC would do an inspection. That's the area I'm speaking about. I'm very much aware of what it is that you've suggested that tenant can do, which I think is a great idea for those tenants who just need to beautify the space a bit. But there are others who are wanting to build out drywall, from the conversations that Uba has been sharing with us, that she's been having with some of the tenants that she's been speaking to who are wanting to do this, especially during the pandemic period when everybody was at home.
Thank you, and through the chair. So if work over and above what was already listed previously in the report is to be undertaken, it does require a permit. So that's why it would have to go through that process. The reason that we would require some way of securing the funds up front is to ensure that the contractor, the consultant that were engaged, would be paid, and that TCHC, as the owner of the property, would not be responsible if, for example, something, a tenant entered into an agreement and then didn't have sufficient funds to pay for it. TCHC could be considered as the owner of the building. We could be responsible. It would also be dangerous to have a partially completed renovation, in any space. So that's why we would have to figure out some mechanism in order to ensure that the funding was available and that it would be available to pay for the work as the work is completed.
Mm-hmm. Through the chair, if I may, and I do realize that this is a complicated. I do think it would be worthwhile not only to hear back from the Housing Secretariat, but there are complexities to this, because of course we need to comply with fire code. We do need to comply with all the permit requirements and all. And typically that does come at a substantial cost. And when we look at what it would, we've done some estimations as to what it would take to renovate or to do construction in a basement. And typically that's in the area, and Alan, correct me if I'm wrong, but it was in the area of $30,000 to $40,000. And so it's a substantial amount of money. And so the whole purpose of looking at it from a pilot perspective and ensuring that there was an interest is we are, as a municipally owned corporation, we're held to a standard in which we must ensure that we are complying with all of those requirements. And so if we are intending to go down this path, we do need to be sure that our tenants are able to do so without causing them unintended consequences of or having I'll say a false set of expectations around what we might be able to do. So I do appreciate the fact that it is burdensome, but this is part of the challenge that we need to consider as well, because of course, for example, egress points in a basement will need to be addressed formally, and will lead to potentially a complexity as to how a basement renovation needs to be done, which will drive cost. And so it's not it's not just a matter of just beautifying the space. If it is even renovated to the point where, say, it could be used as a bedroom space, then those standards, those tests need to be considered as far as how that renovation is being completed. And Alan, please correct me if I'm off on any of those statements.
No, thank you, Jag. You've accurately captured it, that there are just a lot of considerations. And unfortunately, it's not as straightforward as it might sound.
Okay, well, hopefully by the end of the, or by the time of the next meeting rolls around, we'll have the definitive word from the housing secretariat on what we can do and what we can't do.
I have my hand up.
I was going to say, I see Director
Okay.
Fletcher has her hand up.
I just want to have a little more information. First of all, I don't know if this should go to the board. We're talking about overall property, so that's a question that I have. Dara or somebody, if that's the direction, it still needs to go for the pilot. But what I want to be really clear about is what TC, first of all, if there's another room that gets built, then when that family moves out, now that's the unit that's being rented. So it's TCHC's unit, of course, we understand that. So it has to, what does that mean? Number one, it might be immediately for a family, but in the long term, 5 years from now, it's a different apartment. It's a different townhouse that's being rented out than initially started, number one. I do think, and I'm not clear enough on what the fire code pieces are, because they're very strict. And I do know that. So from the fire code side, the liability rests on TCHC around the fire code. And I think as a committee and as a board, that is something really critical. You remember the small little houses that fellow was building, the wooden houses for people that were living in parks, and it was a structure. So anything structural, I just want to be clear that through our buildings department and our fire department, that's all signed off, because once that is built, it doesn't belong to the tenant. It actually belongs to the corporation. That's the difference here from you building one, Debbie. You're talking about building the space to this space getting built. So that I'm almost thinking that we should do a pilot that says we will build that. We'll look at, do we want to expand? How can we expand the number of bedrooms in some of these townhouses as a corporation by adding something in there? Because it has to be added into code, or else me, all of us on this call that are board of directors, we have a problem if it doesn't meet it. So that's the other option. And I know it's different, but at least get one and see what that would look like. We would be adding permanently another room into a townhouse that no matter who lived there, that would be the size. So that's the physical issue. Then there's the issue just around the impact on rent, et cetera, because if you're moving from a 4-bedroom to a 5-bedroom, now.
Although the square footage stays the same.
Pardon me?
Although the square footage stays the same.
I'm not sure that's how it looks at. We have to hear. It's not about square footage. It's about the number of bedrooms for families. So if you're in a 2-bedroom, if you're in a 5-bedroom home and you have 3 people, now you're moved because you're overhoused or somebody's underhoused in a 1-bedroom that has 3 kids. I deal with this all the time from people phoning, and these are the transfer issues. So this is very complex. The easiest way is to say, we're going to take one of these and we're going to do this as TCHC and see what happens, what the requirements are, rather than leave it up to somebody to go get the permit and do all of that. And then it's still our issue, our liability issue. Number one question is, does it meet the fire code? And I haven't heard that yet. So we have to get a clearance from Toronto Fire. And I just think it's, on this whole thing, my preference would be to simply TCHC do one. And then if it's working, how we have that, tenants could do it, understanding new bedroom, maybe new rent, whatever, et cetera, et cetera. And we'd be expanding the bedroom numbers, which often we don't have a lot of big bedroom places.
Through the chair.
Yes.
If I may, and if the committee's will would be, what we could look at doing is having Alan and his team to go through the design efforts that would meet fire code and all, and bring that information back before we were to say launch a pilot, and look at what the implications of that would be, and in order to consider.
So we still, I think that we're getting, I mean, it's good to find out what the housing secretary wants. Some of these other issues, I mean, I don't know that staff actually has an instance where somebody has come forward and made this request. And so I think it's at that time that you would look to do a pilot. Is that not a fair statement? I mean, before we go down this path and spend more time on it, let's
I think people have requested, they just haven't come directly. I think there might be
Yeah.
one or
Well,
two locations to find out.
yeah, I mean, that's the understanding, but anyway, let's wait to hear back from the housing secretary and see what they say about what we can and can't do, and then we look at the other implications. And of course, if there's a building permit that has to meet fire, the building department works with the fire department to make sure what's to code, and take it from there. So
apologies, Chair Campbell,
yeah.
but I do think
I
that
agree.
just given the intersection of facilities, financial implications, and everything else, this may be something that you would want to consider at a board level.
Yes.
Okay, for sure.
I
And
agree.
I think all of those things should come together. Impact, fire code, looking as the option to have a package, should that proceed, to that we would do that. It would be done first corporately, and then if it could spill off after. There's nobody that can go through all these steps. I just feel like anybody who wants to do this, imagine getting stuck there. So all these things would need to be cleared, because what it means to me is we would be adding another bedroom into, is it a 3-bedroom townhouse? Now it's a 4-bedroom townhouse. Is it a 2-bedroom townhouse? Now it's a 3-bedroom. It's our housing stock that's changing. So let's start from that point of view, which may be actually very good thing. How would we accomplish that? And it's not just up to the tenant, because when they leave, they're not taking that with them. It's now a permanent feature of that location.
Okay, so we'll have a motion to, so Jag, was there some undertaking that you wanted, you were suggesting be done then?
Through the chair, if you could maybe receive the report and direct staff to follow up with a updated report, maybe to the whole of the board, as to implications of essentially financial and design implications of the basement renovations.
Okay, all right. That sounds like a good plan. Councillor Fletcher can move that motion.
I'd also look at if that's something for a housing stock that we think would increase the rooms.
All right. So
Okay.
Derek, we're going to receive the report, and Councillor Fletcher will move a motion to look at some of the implications in terms of how it affects the rent and on a go forward basis, and I guess an interchange, also looking at implications with the fire code and so on. And so once we get the word from the housing secretariat, that we have all of the information necessary to set up the pilot.
Understood. So we'll plan on bringing that to the first meeting, the next regularly scheduled meeting of the board,
Okay.
which will be in October.
Okay. All right. Well, do we have a tenant services committee meeting before then?
We do. There is a meeting in September that will lead into the October meeting.
Okay, and hopefully by the September meeting, we'll have a report back on this item from the housing, in regard to what the housing secretariat has said. Okay, don't want to necessarily keep putting it off. All right, so a motion to receive the information from Councillor Fletcher.
Yeah.
All in favor?
I'm
Thank
sorry,
you.
Dar, don't we have a board meeting later this month?
We do, but I think it's unlikely that by
Oh, I
that
see.
time we'll have
I
the
see.
comprehensive type of report that's required in relation to
Okay.
that.
I think it's the Ernst & Young on that, isn't it, our financial thing that we're going to be dealing with?
All right, so now I see Miguel is here, and we're going to go back to item 6B, which is the tenant complaints update. And I saw him here at one point.
Vila?
Yes, Mr. Vila. There he is. Good morning, Miguel.
Good morning, everybody. I want to thank the opportunity to speak at this services committee again. Just to let you know that I have circulated my deputation, and my deputation includes a petition letter from 35 residents of my community. We have experienced an unusual situation, very unusual. And I have lived in this community for 12 years. Besides the regular noise complaints that you guys receive daily, this one in particularly affected the lives of half of the building. And it was not because due to construction. And by the way, we are going to have a complete schedule of construction for the year 2024. It's my understanding. We're going to be renovating the balconies. We're going to do a lot of hammering, drilling that will affect the enjoyment of the residents' sleeps, and et cetera, et cetera. Particularly this situation addresses the need for accommodations. So in light that the Ombudsman has made a report to TCHC, and I'm glad to see Mr. Jack Sharma is still with us, perhaps as a way to appease the request of the Ombudsman, you could perhaps take a look at the petition, Mr. Jack, and seek solutions. I'm happy to say that, I have had discussions with the local staff, and they're eager to see if the board in general are willing to make some proactive out-of-the-box solutions to address the accommodation requests made by the residents who have signed the petition. I don't have nothing else to say, but I want to thank for the opportunity to address this committee. I want to thank again local staff for allowing me to share my experience and the experience of the other residents who have been disturbed in a level that never has happened before. So hopefully, crossing fingers, there will be a solution in the works, and we will be continue enjoying our tenancy, and our sleep will be deprived. That's all I had to say. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Miguel. Thank you very much for coming on and making the deputation. Any questions of the deputant? Okay, seeing none, on the item, any questions?
I'm just wondering, obviously, there's a discussion there with the local staff, so perhaps through Nadia and Jay, that could be reported back, what that situation might be, and what local staff are waiting for you to do something I don't understand what. Thank you. I'm
Okay.
sure they've been in touch with you directly rather than sit around and wait.
So through the chair, we are actively following up and we will provide updates as needed, but we are dealing with the issue. Thank
Okay.
you.
And a motion to receive the item. Moved by Debbie Douglas. Did I see your hand up, Debbie?
No, but sure.
Okay, thank you. All right, all in favor? That item is received and dealt with. And then we move on to the facility management reports. We have 2 deputants on, oh, it's item 7B. So we've done A, we've done A, and then on 7B, on the TCHC's air conditioning exchange and replacement program, we have 2 deputants. Catherine Wilkinson, are you there? I see Catherine.
Of course I wouldn't leave you, John.
Right, thank you.
You wouldn't
Okay.
get that lucky.
No. Okay, so listen, you want to make some comments on the air conditioning exchange
I
program?
do, and thank you. And there's 2 things I forgot to comment on earlier. To welcome Ziva, our newest tenant director. I'm here for you. I've had the privilege of sitting at that table. You will have the time of your life. I also want to acknowledge we have a fabulous new mayor of the city of Toronto, who's all about the creation and maintaining affordable housing. So I guess Jag will be working with her to make that magic happen. Okay, so to item 7B, the status on the window air conditioner exchange replacement. The experts are telling us extreme heat waves and fluctuations in temperatures are going to get much, much worse in the future. In 2019, the city declared a climate emergency, noting that only 6% of apartment buildings in Toronto have AC. Smoke from the wildfires resulted recently in Toronto Public Health advising residents to stay indoors and keep their windows and doors closed. Doing that without air conditioning could lead to serious health issues. This created a call to action by all levels of government. It's no longer a question of, whose responsibility it is to provide air conditioning in rental units. The provincial report indicates a key objective is to ensure that all tenants in Ontario have access to cooling through the use of an AC in their unit. And our report indicates that Toronto Housing is already achieving this within its existing policy. I don't think we're quite there yet. There are still thousands of tenants who do not have air conditioning whatsoever. Keep in mind, what we're talking about is an air conditioner exchange program. So if you did not already own a window AC, you were not provided with AC. So previously, Toronto Housing tracked the number of ACs during the annual unit inspections. At this time, we do not know how many households do not have an AC. That will be important information to know going forward, of course. In addition to the proposed changes to the Residential Tenancy Act, on June 14th at the City Council meeting, a member's motion was passed proposing the creation of a new adequate temperature bylaw with the request for additional reports to come back to the Planning and Housing Committee in the first quarter of 2024. And this bylaw actually already exists in the city of Hamilton and Mississauga. Now, some of you may recall during the 2021 heat wave in BC, there were 619 deaths of low-income households who had no indoor fan or AC. We're living in unprecedented times, temperatures are unpredictable, people's lives may be at risk. So given a myriad of issues with the current portable TCHC AC unit, should we be required to purchase additional models in the future, I suggest we consider alternatives. I support the staff recommendation that this window exchange program should remain on hold. There are too many moving parts outside of Toronto Housing's control with the Residential Tenancy Act amendments by the province and the city's proposed adequate temperature bylaw. I have 2 recommendations. Number 1, window ACs over a balcony present minimal risk. We keep hearing that, we keep saying that. The province may actually override the Toronto Community Housing no window AC policy. it may be determined they can remain in the future. For this reason, the proposed 1.2 million earmarked for air conditioner exchanges would be put to better use to provide air conditioning to households that currently do not have one at all. The second recommendation is this is a really important tenant issue. Make no mistake, our tenants are suffering. Pending next steps from the province and the city, I would like to recommend Toronto Housing create a dedicated tenant work group to work with staff to create a tenant air conditioning policy. We currently do not have one. The policy at Toronto Community Housing is no window ACs allowed. That's our policy. Work with the tenants to develop a policy on use of ACs and how that will be managed once the unknowns are known. Have them test a couple of different models and provide feedback on models that will meet the comfort and health needs of our tenants while considering the energy needs, risk, and operational cost to the landlord. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you, Catherine, and well timed. Any questions of the deputant? Okay. Nope, I don't see any questions, Catherine. Thank you very much. The debate's made some good points. Appreciate that. Next deputant is Charlie Machia. Is that Charlie?
That's it, yes. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Did I say the name right?
That's close enough. Charlie Macchia is the name.
Macchia, okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. First, I'd like to thank you for inviting me to speak today. As you just heard, my name is Charlie Macchia. I'm the tenant rep for TCHC's Janice Foley Place. And first, a quick thanks is due to Councillor Fletcher for helping us to rename our building in the honor of our previous beloved tenant rep. May she rest in peace. Let me begin my statements with some quotes from Consumer Reports, the largest independent consumer testing agency in North America. Think of portable air conditioners as the cooling choice of last resort. They are better than a fan, but far from a window AC. Despite manufacturer claims, these units barely get a room below sweltering. Portable units are typically bigger, noisier, and more expensive, and they use more energy. In fact, retailers report that many portable air conditioners are returned each season by dissatisfied customers. And our experience at Janice Foley Place bears this out in spades. Let me start with my experience. I live currently in the hottest unit in the building. I'm on the top floor and I'm directly underneath a very hot roof. And my unit faces southwest, so it gets blasted by the hot late afternoon sun. Even though my previous air conditioner was only rated at 8,000 BTU, after the exchange with a portable unit, the reduction in cooling in my apartment with the new portable unit was both instant and dramatic. Whereas my old window AC typically cooled my apartment reasonably well up until it got to about 32 Celsius outside, my new 10,000 BTU portable, despite its claimed 20% better cooling capacity, on its own is hopeless. It only cooled a small 10-foot bubble directly around itself, and the rest of my apartment remained the same sweltering temperature it was on the outside. But to make matters worse, you're bathed in white noise from the significantly louder portable air conditioner that you're forced to sit next to all day long. Quick note about me. I once worked as an audio mastering engineer at the Grammy Award-winning Cherry Beach Recording Studios, and though I stopped that line of work since I don't enjoy loud music anymore due to a sailing accident, I still have my trusty sound level meter. So being the audio geek that I am, and you can probably hear, naturally I measured these air conditioners. My new portable unit sits at around 68 to 70 decibels, whereas my window unit sat at around 64. That's a 6 decibel difference. Now, that might not seem like much, but that's actually perceived by humans as about twice as loud. And that especially makes a difference when on a hot day, to stay cool, you have to sit next to it. And the problem with that is white noise that loud all day long is actually quite stressful for humans, and it starts to feel like the walls are closing in on you. In fact, as more portable air conditioners are sold, There were so many complaints that the American Department of Energy created a new measurement system to more accurately specify their cooling capacity, and that's what's become the new DOE standard. So, in a nutshell, what's the problem with portable air conditioners? Portable air conditioners have to suck the cool air out of your unit to pump out the heat, but that air must then be replaced. Otherwise, long before you couldn't breathe anymore, your apartment would literally implode. So air pumped out must match air sucked in. And that replacement air has to come from somewhere. Usually it comes from the outside, or it comes from an unfortunate neighbor who doesn't realize why his apartment suddenly isn't quite as cool as it used to be. It literally becomes a rob cool air from Peter to play Paul scenario. So I'm going to quote the backgrounder document provided by TCHC back in 2019 when this program started. Portable models provide more cooling and are safer, quieter, and more energy efficient. Well, based on our tenants' experience, the Department of Energy experience, and the testing of a large independent agency, when it comes to window air conditioners, only 3 out of 4 of those statements is actually true. In fact, in the case of a window air conditioner over a balcony, actually, none of it's true. So, assuming the most egregious of the risky window units have now been dealt with, please stop this program. We need a much more informed, flexible, and more realistic approach. A senior leader down the hall from me had to call an ambulance and go to emerge from heat stroke due to her own portable AC unit not cooling sufficiently. These things just don't work very well.
Got it, Charlie. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Very good sound quality, by the way, in your deputation. Just wanted to point that out. Really well done. All right.
Thanks.
Any questions of the deputant? All right. So I have a question. So you are sorry. Do you have an over the balcony window air conditioner now, or do you have only the inside the apartment air conditioner?
It's a great, excellent question. I am inadvertently an experiment. I have both because I have to.
Okay, great, thank you. And I'll ask if any other committee members have a question of the deputant. Okay, no, seeing none. All right, thank you very much, Charlie, for the deputation.
Thank you.
Oh, sorry, Marcel does. Marcel has a question. Marcel, go ahead.
Do you know any of the actual portable units that are less loud and more efficient?
Excellent question, Marcel.
As opposed to the window ones?
Portable is, yes. Well, there used to be portable units that you could buy that had both an input from the outside, and so on one hose, and an exhalation on another hose. They're not typically made anymore. Essentially, how portable units work is they try to do a better equilibrium between heat pumped out through the air that gets pumped out versus the air that gets sucked in. And they try to get a little of that game. But the net result of that is that only the area directly around the unit winds up being cool, and the rest of your apartment is sweltering.
Okay, thank you. Thanks very much, Charlie. Any questions of staff on this item? Okay. I have a question of staff, and Alan, it's probably directed to you. He mentioned that he's on the top floor, and the heat beats down in the building. Do we have any green roofs?
Through your Chair Campbell, I don't, but
So I could assist with that, Chair
I
Campbell.
think there might be in a new building that I'm sorry. Go ahead.
That's what I was just going to say, is that we do have some green roofs, and we are moving towards those in our new building designs.
And Jag, is it possible to sort of, I guess, retrofit or to add greening to some of the existing buildings?
I think this would be where Alan's advice would certainly be valuable. I think in significant retrofits of buildings, those types of considerations could be made, but once again, more challenging in an existing building than a new building.
And Alan, any other comment?
I just, through you, Chair Campbell, agree with Jag's statements. It does, retrofitting a building can be much different than when you're building a new building, because with the new building, you're taking into account the requirements for weight, requirements for drainage, all of those things that can come with a green roof, as well as existing buildings not being designed for green roofs. There can be things that are on the roof. It's just the same with solar panels, right? You can design a new building to allow for solar panels because you specifically design it so you've got that space. On our existing buildings, the way they were constructed when they were done, the roof is used to house a number of things like mechanical rooms, elevator rooms. Often there can be ductwork and things like that going across the roof of a building. So it's it all depends on the building, really. You'd have to look at each building individually.
And we do some work with TAF, correct?
Absolutely.
But
we do a lot of work with TAF.
Yeah. But have they ever brought up the subject of green roofs?
I would have to check that. I'm sure it's probably been a discussion at one time. I would absolutely think it is, because I know that the design and engineering team that I have work with TAF constantly, and they're always looking at different options, ways to reduce our energy use, you know, and improve the tenant comfort in our buildings.
Got it. Okay. Thank you very much. That's, you know,
Thank you.
It would be great if we could somehow make green all of our roofs, you know. So anyhow, okay, that's it. If there are no further questions,
Marcel's.
Marcel has his hand up
Marcel,
again.
yeah, sometimes I don't see these little yellow hands coming up. I see the hands, but not the little yellow hands. Go ahead, Marcel.
Yeah, just a couple of things. It's a combination of the two deputants. One, we are going through some very tough times as far as the environment, the heat, and whatnot. And it does. I do get worried about tenants not being able to cool down properly in their units, and could possibly end up in some health issue. Like for myself, I have a little bit of a problem with the heat and all these things. But is it possible for like a group of the tenants to have like a working group for like better cooling the units? Because I think sometimes, well, most times, I think there are concerns about like health risk and with the heat and overheating, and then having to, you know, you get sick going to the hospital. I think that's something that is definitely not a good thing. But being able to find other ways to cool down the units for people that are who are vulnerable and have like health issues, I think it would be something worthwhile looking into, is if could have like a working group to explore other options, because this weather's not going to change the way it is.
Through you, Chair Campbell, Director Charlebois, I can say there are programs that are available through the city and perhaps other agencies for tenants who aren't financially able to afford air conditioning, but do require it, as you mentioned, you know, for vulnerable tenants as an example. There are programs that are available to assist residents in the city with the purchase of air conditioners. So if there is a tenant that medically requires air conditioning, there are definitely programs that are available that they can go through to assist with the purchase of one if they're not able to financially afford one.
Any other question, Marcel? Do you have air conditioning in your unit?
Yeah, but it's a balcony one, so I'm pretty good.
Right. Okay. All right. Motion to receive the item, please, from one of the members. Moved by Uba. All in favor? Thank you. And I think that concludes things, does it, Darren?
Yes, that's the last of the agenda items.
All right. Thank you all very much. Hopefully next time we can meet in person. And Debbie, did you have your hand up?
No, I was just saying bye.
Oh, okay. I thought that was a motion to adjourn.
The motion to adjourn.
Adjourn. All in favor? Thank you very much. Thanks all. Thank you to staff for the presentations and all the work that goes into the meeting. And thank you, committee members. All right.